Welcome back, everyone, to yet another edition of Going for Two, presented by Homefield Apparel. I am your host, Matt Brown, the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter. I am joined, as always, by my colleague and friend, Bryan Fischer. Bryan, happy starts to one of the most wonderful times in the sports calendar, noon ball.
Oh,
Pretty great, right?
it's even earlier for us here on the West Coast, but I do love this time of year, not just because we get to see a lot of basketball, but because it's a great spotlight on some of the programs. You're like, I'm now invested in Stony Brook, like I'm now invested in Vermont, and like you just get into these games that were during all the tournaments, and it's great again out on the West Coast where it starts even earlier. So you kind of got really your entire day is taken care of if you want that background TV on, but it is the best time of the year.
I have been honest about this. I do not consider myself primarily a college basketball fan. I don't watch that sport as often as I watch college football, but there's something about that magical TV window when it's unexpected. And then absolutely, I would love to watch the eighth place team in the Southern Conference shoot 37% from the floor if it's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And that isn't me being like an ironic, like an irony brained Twitter person or a jerk. No, it's fun. It's fun, even like for me, even when the gym's only half full. And then over the course of the week, with the pressure, and then suddenly those teams are playing in front of far more packed houses than maybe they're used to. You begin to see the genesis of the Cinderella story. That's fun. Like that is one of the college basketball does a lot of things that could be done a lot better. This part of the calendar leading up to this postseason for men and women, I think it rules. Like it's a great couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, this is kind of one of the best times for me personally, just because I can kind of figure out what school is in what league. I sometimes I need a refresher for some of those smaller leagues, but it is fantastic to not only see the basketball itself, but even just like the teams that understand the pressure of that tournament bid and how it can come down to one or two shots. I mean, you look Indiana Rutgers and that thrilling inning with Ron Harper Jr. going off. Like there's some of these moments, that just seem to happen here once that calendar flips over to March, and it's going to be a wild ride. I think the fact that we don't have that Baylor Gonzaga kind of duo at the top of college basketball this year, where there's really maybe 7-8 programs that could really win it all, that you say have the talent to win it all, and then you have the depth of the mid-major class, coming out of the OVC and the MAC and the American East. Like it's one of the better years, I think, in terms of the depth of college basketball that compared to last year, and really compared to the last couple of years, given some of the COVID restrictions and some of the craziness that has gone on around the sport. Just kind of all coalesced into what should be a really thrilling rest of the month. And I tell you what, going back even to way back when if you have a chance to go back to like Las Vegas for some of these NCAA tournament games, or you have an opportunity to go, for these conference tournaments, or just kind of come for that conference tournament, it's so thrilling to kind of watch 5 different buzzer beaters go on at once. Like this truly is kind of, if you are invested at all in college athletics, this is the month for you.
Yeah, it was a bummer that schedules didn't work out, and a couple other things came up. I had originally planned on going to at least one of these tournaments, and now I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe next year we'll post up and we'll do something from Vegas for all of these. So
A live going for 2. I'm totally down for that.
Yeah, right. It's been a minute. I think it's important that you mentioned the depth in college basketball this season. And thinking back to when we talked with Rutherford, we talked to some other people. This does feel like a less traditional season in a couple of different ways. Beyond the fact you don't have a Death Star behemoth team, and it's funny to think about that. If you did, that team might be Auburn. That might be some teams that aren't your Dukes, Michigan State's kind of butt, and of course then they'll be not butt later. But you normally would think like, okay, if some traditional powers aren't as strong this year, and there's the difference between a 3 seed and a 7 seed is not very strong, then this would be the year maybe where you would expect a lot of attrition, a lot of new, a very robust coaching cycle, right? And this show that we do at this time of the week, we're trying to recap some of the major stories that we didn't get to turn into anything. Bryan, it sure seems like one of the big storylines for men's college basketball is that a whole bunch of schools that you would think would be making coaching changes are not making coaching changes. This might be a pretty quiet coaching carousel, huh?
It seems like certainly in sharp contrast to the college football cycle, which was as active as ever and really as long as ever. It does seem like we've already gotten some changeover right now. UMass
It
is
ended like last week. We thought Bryan Harsin was going to get fired like 8 days ago.
Yeah, a wild, lengthy time, especially when you think about like Clay Helton getting fired so early in the season and that really kicking things off and everything that happened on the football side. But, basketball side, we do have, UMass is making a change at head coach. You're starting to see some others either make a kind of, a commitment to their head coach to come back for another year, or certainly it's starting to leak out that maybe this is kind of their last run as these conference tournaments wrap up. But you're right, it does not seem like a very active cycle. And I think there's a lot of turnover that's happened previously contributing to that. Just a lot of new coaches that are in their first or second year. But honestly, it's just because of the depth. I think that there's no really truly awful teams at the very bottom of some of these leagues. And so that's kind of contributed. There's been some chaos up at the top. I mean, you mentioned just the SEC, you mentioned Auburn earlier, like the top 4 teams in the SEC, like they've only lost like 2 home games. And that's just wild to kind of think about. And it is really going to make things really interesting as we get into those neutral sites at the conference tournaments and into the first and second rounds.
As I'm trying to keep track of school announcements and votes of confidence here over the past couple of days. And please interrupt me if I miss some, because again, this is not the world where I am native, so I may be missing something. But just over the past, like this week, NC State has said, hey, we're keeping Keats, which would have been a little surprising if they had dumped him this early into the tenure, but NC State cares a lot about college basketball, and they are not very good right now. Arizona State says that Hurley is coming back. Think we know a little bit that Arizona State under this administration seems perfectly content with bringing back embattled coaches of major programs. So maybe that shouldn't be surprising, but they've won with Hurley before. You might expect that team to be better.
They've gotten hot lately. I mean, just the last couple of weeks, they've turned into one of the better teams in the Pac-12 in terms of they're just really a night and day difference from kind of how they were earlier in the year to these last couple of weeks. They've been one of the teams that you really don't want to play out west, and it's been a very interesting Pac-12 season overall. But to see that Bobby Hurley was coming back, I mean, no surprise, I think, for anybody that's been following ASU athletics, as you mentioned, and also I think the on-court performance has turned around to the point where it would have been probably difficult to swallow all that money, go through another coaching search, especially considering we don't know if Ray Anderson, the AD, is going to be there, all that much longer. So it makes sense from a school standpoint to bring him back for another year.
Yeah, no, it's not, when you put it in context, that makes sense. When you pair it maybe with everybody else, maybe a little bit less so. So that's one. The big one, of course, is Georgetown. What Georgetown men's basketball Big East win this season was your favorite?
Well, then there would be 0 of them. So there's
none wins. And yet and Georgetown was lucky to make the NCAA tournament at all last time when they kind of got hot and backed him after winning the conference tournament. They've never really been that good under Pat Ewing. And they are going to bring him back. Now, again, you could extenuating of circumstances, COVID year, maybe some roster attrition you weren't expecting, a younger team, all those things understandable. Also, man's a legend within that program. Georgetown knows a thing or two about maybe retaining a head coach or administrator a few seasons past the expiration date because they are beloved institutional icons. Maybe that's not the best way to run a program. What do I know? I'm a guy in a hoodie and some headphones, right? Like I'm clearly firing everybody every 2 years isn't the right answer too, but I don't know any Georgetown fans or anybody invested in that program that's especially excited about the direction they're going, knowing that Patrick Ewing will be coming back and not playing. But
this is kind of that double-edged sword of hiring an alum, right? At some point, you might have to hire
and not just an alum, but one of the most famous, most universally beloved institutions. That's true. It never meet your heroes, never hire your heroes. No, because eventually you're going to have to fire the guy with the statue up front, and that's coming later, but not this year.
It is interesting in particular with the Georgetown case, just to stay on it just a little bit. But obviously, this is a school that does have, as you kind of alluded to, some experience in terms of firing a legend. Obviously, they kind of kept JT3 a little bit past his prime there. And, just having that John Thompson name certainly carried a lot of weight in terms of his hiring originally. And then obviously just kind of the protracted firing and how the program kind of slowly started that decline. But I mean, when Patrick Ewing took over, I know there was a lot of focus on this was a guy who was up for a lot of NBA jobs. A lot of folks were excited about bringing an alum like that back just in terms of name recognition, but it just hasn't worked out. And I think that's, it definitely is an interesting contrast to certainly before the punch thrown and all that happened. But with Juwan Howard coming in, another NBA guy coming from those ranks into the college game, adapted a little bit easier just to recruiting, towards bringing guys in. And I think the reason why is he had a guy like Phil Martelli around him that could kind of help shepherd him. I'm not sure that Patrick Ewing really had that guy that he could lean on to know the college game, because it is so different. And it's changed so much recently with one-time transfer, everything going on around not just the transfer portal, but you have NIL now. I mean, this is college basketball itself has changed a lot the last 5-6 years, and still going to continue to have those changes, and you got to be quick to adapt. I'm not sure that Patrick Ewing has done that. Obviously, we see the results so far on the court. It's going to be difficult to kind of climb out of this hole, but the good news for Georgetown, at least they go in with some certainty going into next year. Maybe that can help them on the recruiting trail, doing it now, making that announcement now, to where you can say, hey, we're going to be there. You're only going to be here at school for a year, so you might as well come on in, play in the Big East, play in a Big East that has those big time games. You can play in those big time moments at Villanova, at Providence, at other places. And so, maybe that can help, giving that early vote of confidence. But we all know that some difficult decisions are coming up for not just this program with Hoyas, but for a lot of others these next couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, I'm sitting here trying to rack my brain, and maybe I'm forgetting somebody that's obvious, but we have two high profile gigs that are open right now: Maryland and Louisville. And Louisville, friends, if you want to hear more about the program, we've done 1.5 podcast episodes about it. We're all going to end up, if we work here long enough, with 12 credit hours in Kentucky history. That's clearly a unique situation. Maryland, I don't know, it seemed like a good job in some ways. It's a place you can win that they haven't been winning. The fans care a lot. And then from there is a huge step down. Like, Tom Crean's probably going to get fired at Georgia, and that job has been mostly garbage since both of us have been alive in basketball, which is strange. People forget this. They did win the national championship in college football, so you can win things there.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Georgia there. We on the previous episode with Justin Ferguson about Auburn Explained, and he made it a point that a big part of Bruce Pearl's turnaround has been recruiting that Atlanta area. So there are players
that, a lot of good players there.
Yeah, so if you are looking at that Georgia job, it can be attractive to the right coach, but it's you got to find the right fit, and I think it's going to be a big task ahead of Josh Brooks, the AD there, and what that department ultimately wants to do. They've made some investments, around the program. Obviously, you come off that national title in football, and there's a lot of euphoria surrounding all their sports. They've been pretty big in terms of poaching some big names in the Olympic sports. They've brought in track coaches that have had a lot of national championship success. So this is obviously a holistic department that does want to do well in basketball, and finding the right fit is going to be a priority to them. But Louisville and Maryland are kind of the two big fish out there, and two very unique situations too, because you look at that Louisville gig, not just all the talk about, you hear Kenny Payne obviously being the big name connected to that, being the local alum and having success up the road there in Lexington and now with the Knicks, but that's going to have a big impact on who ultimately gets that AD job, at Louisville. So I think there's another kind of layer to that search as well.
It was, those are great points. It was hard for my internet brain to transition from good fit and Tom Crean, because I'm just picturing the guy with the pants, way up to his forehead. And to Georgia's credit, Tom Crean was an established name. He won a lot of games at Marquette. He won several games at Indiana, not enough, but there were people that thought that maybe he should have gotten a little bit more time. He's not a bad basketball coach. He brought in Anthony Edwards, who I thoroughly enjoy watching in the NBA right now. It's one of the funniest guys in the NBA. It didn't work out. But if your third or fourth biggest job is Clemson basketball, Mississippi State basketball, Georgia basketball, a lot of these Southern football schools, that's a quiet cycle. I mean, maybe somebody unexpected retires, but I mean, last year we did have Duke and North Carolina and Texas and Indiana all kind of change over. So that changes things. With football, it's been explosive the last 2 cycles in a row. Maybe we're kind of entering a world where football is always going to be crazy, but early returns indicate not an absolutely bananas men's basketball cycle. And even at the mid-major level, I don't know if there's going to be that many enormous big, I don't know, maybe Xavier, maybe Butler. I mean, I'm a little concerned about my American Eagles, who I think may need to potentially go in a different direction after, I think, finishing near the bottom of the Patriot League. Guys, you have my cell phone number. I am prepared to drop the bag for the red, white, and blue if we have to do that. they've been pretty bad, man. But that's a hard place to that's a hard place to win. Um, the many of those were some of the bigger stories. I mean, again, kind of as I was thinking about, it's weird because it's not a mid-major league anymore, right? Like it would for the college basketball. Like what is the American? Because like it's a multi-bid league. It's not exactly the Big East, but if you have Houston, who could be a Final Four team, and you have Penny Hardaway, and you have some of these other big-time coaches, it's not the Missouri Valley. Like what do you call it?
I I would kind of put it right there below the Big East. Just kind of that's kind of the Big Six. If you include the Big Six with your kind of Power Five, and then right below it is the American. And I mean, truthfully, it's a really interesting league. Obviously, there's a ton of storylines going on at Memphis and everything going on with that team. Maybe that's a team that just gets hot in the tournament and makes a run, and they certainly have the talent to do, but Penny Hardaway's been in the news for a lot of things that have happened away from the court. So you never know with them, but Memphis is there. Obviously you have Houston, you have some of these pretty solid basketball schools, having some pretty good years, and even some that are not having kind of years up to their standard, like Wichita State. This is still Cincinnati, another one, pretty solid collection of basketball programs. And I think it does make for a pretty solid league, but and you look elsewhere. I mean, there's a lot of multi-big leagues. I think that could be out there that could kind of squeeze somebody like the American just because of the pressure and depth that we've seen at the mid-major level.
Yeah. It seems like it's a 2, maybe 3 bid league this season. Maybe a couple of their higher profile teams are having down years. It's also a league, of course, that's going to be changing quite a bit. They are adding a bunch of schools, some of whom, like North Texas, pretty good at basketball. Then some other schools like Rice, who plays basketball. It's clearly not the same thing. One of the big questions that anybody that cares about mid-major realignment or mid-major athletics is trying to figure out the timelines for when schools are going to be leaving. Their bylaws might say one thing, and the conference, the television networks, and university presidents and ads might want something else. My understanding is this week we have a little bit of an idea of how much the American Athletic would like schools to pay if they want to depart early, which it certainly seems like schools like Cincinnati and Houston actually want to do. It's a lot of money, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of the whole crux of the matter when you talk about conference realignment. At some point, these exits need to get paid. The ultimate end date needs to happen, and sorting all out of that out, can be difficult. You're talking about the multi-billion-dollar institutions in some cases, having to pay some of these fees and navigating things with the university department and the athletic department and everything that kind of goes into it. And so it can be difficult at times to kind of find that common ground, because a lot of these conference offices, they need to know for things like schedules. I mean, the other big kind of storyline this week is obviously coming out of the Sun Belt with those 4 new members being on that football schedule for the 2022. They're all locked in litigation. I think you could start to see, a lot of questions that have arisen from that, obviously starting with the AAC in terms of those additional fees that the conference wants to get out early. I don't think that's going to end up happening, but it also brought up the point that, Texas and Oklahoma, how long are they going to be in the Big 12? I think there's some talk that maybe they do last until 2025 before ultimately ending the league. I don't think that's going to end up happening, but it could be a year or two longer than I think some of those Texas and Oklahoma fans ultimately wanted when that news broke last summer.
Yeah, a Big 12 that has Texas and Oklahoma and also BYU and Cincinnati in it might make for some strange bedfellows in the beginning. If I'm remembering the reports from this week, I believe this came out of the Houston Chronicle, that the bylaws stipulate if you want to leave early, or if you want to leave, you got to pay $10 million as your exit fee. And if I'm reading the Chronicle's report here, that the American would like an additional $35 million to depart early. And having to pay an extra fee to depart early is, not like with the Big 12, not unheard of. These things happen at the low major level too, where there's not massive amounts of television money at stake. The extra fee might be $250,000, $500,000. An exit fee substantially north of $1 million is uncommon, but that's kind of the amount of money you're looking at here. 35 is a lot of money, and it would make sense on one hand if you're the American to try to grab as much money as you possibly can, because you don't know where the next round of money is coming from. I know that when we talked earlier about realignment, that everybody close to the AAC was saying we're going to keep our ESPN television agreement as currently stipulated, which is going to pay out close to $7 million a year per institution. Everybody I've talked to in the television industry has said there's no way, because the inventory is not as valuable unless you're making some other concession. We'll find out about that one way or the other. But you're not going to make as much money from tournament units or from selling tickets, and that money is not going to be shared with the teams that are coming in that are brand new. Like Charlotte's not going to get a chunk of this. So if you're a school like ECU or Tulsa or Tulane and you have an uncertain future over the next decade, and you have a chance to grab $8 million or $10 million from these other schools, by God, yeah, you got to do it. I would assume that whatever the final number on the giant novelty check is will be somewhere north of 10 and probably somewhere south of 35, but I don't know where it's going to be in between. Like that's a lot of money, especially because it's not like you're coming into a league where you're going to make $50 million a year from ABC for your tier 1 TV rights.
Well, I mean, and the AAC has experience going through this entire process before. They've gone to court over some of these fees. I mean, we've seen these type of discussions go on with a lot of schools. You go back to Maryland leaving the ACC in terms of that protracted battle as well. So I think this is obviously something, as you mentioned, there will be billable hours involved in terms of negotiating.
Woo! Hell yeah!
It's what is that final number ultimately going to be? You're right. I sincerely doubt that they will end up paying $35 million. That seems like very far-fetched, not just the number plucked kind of out of thin air, but just in terms of these schools, all right, they'll stick around because honestly, when you look at that Big 12 television deal and what they're going to get as they're probably phased in terms of the revenue the first couple of years, it's probably not a huge jump from going from the AAC all the way to the Big 12 as they start phasing things in. And then we don't know what the status of the Big 12 new TV deals are. So, that is another thing that you kind of got to keep in mind, that you might be expecting some sort of huge jump to where, these schools could totally afford that $35 million. Probably not going to be the case. They're probably going to get, as they kind of say in the NFL, some cap smoothing in terms of that number ultimately kind of being a little bit linear that they end up receiving. And I think it makes for an interesting reading, because the AC, not the only league that's going through this right now.
Unquestionably, cap smoothing is really a great way of putting it. And that's honestly the way it is for almost everybody that makes a league jump. Even if you're jumping to a league where you're going to make a lot more money from television, you typically don't get that full distribution from year one. And your expenses are going to go up significantly in the short term as well, because your facilities now need to reach the median of your new conference peers. Your recruiting expenses and your travel and your infrastructure and your staff may all have to go up. Your cost of attendance may shift for some of these other things. So better financial times in the future eventually, but I wouldn't expect that necessarily in year one. On the off chance here, I know people at Cincinnati, UCF, Memphis, and not Memphis, Houston, and BYU listen to the show. Friends, if you do have an extra $30 million to give to the American Athletic Conference during this transition or elsewhere, I would encourage you to send a note to sales@extrapointsnb.com. We would like some of that money to promote, I don't know, ribs or Montgomery Inn barbecue in Cincinnati or something associated with your, like, let's talk. That's all I'm saying. If you have that much extra money in the couch cushions, we can help you find a way to spend it. One way you can spend that extra money that you are going to send to your conference exit fees: Homefield Apparel. Our title sponsor here for this podcast, the world's greatest purveyor of comfortable, unique, licensed collegiate apparel. Whether that's hoodies, which has become the new work from home uniform when I'm not filming videos for Collegiate Sports Connect and have to put on a sports jacket. Whether that's t-shirts, I am currently wearing the University of Washington Bow Down to Washington Husky t-shirt underneath my Marquette hoodie. Whether that's sweatpants, whether that's stickers, which aren't really clothing, but they do stick to stuff, which is wonderful. Homefield Apparel has you covered. Bryan, do you know what they are dropping this week?
You're going to tell us. So it's definitely an important school. That the thing is, I was still looking at the Villanova stuff that dropped last week. I was still going through that. I have not yet put in my most recent order, but there's a pretty big school coming up. There is. This week we've got Kansas, and we have teased, and I mean our friends at Homefield have teased the design. Oh, we teased the Jayhawk logo last. If it's like a regular listener, it's magenta.
It looks like it was made in 1914. There's plants going on. It is your the vintage. It's your great grandpa's Kansas Jayhawk stuff. Looks awesome. Also this week for our mid-major aficionado friends, you probably don't have a dunking Georgia Panther in your life. And that is something that can be rectified thanks to our friends at homefieldapparel.com. Georgia State promoting the last arena, the last game in the Georgia State Sports Arena. So if you want to look at what looks like Pink Panther, but he's blue and he is tomahawk jamming, and it looks awesome. You can get that there. You can save 15% off your first order by using promo code Extra Points. I don't think it's case sensitive. I've always been typing it in all caps. Better to do that just to be safe. But if you type in those magic words, you save 15% on your first order, whether that's an Extra Points t-shirt with our delightful Bagman logo, whether that's stickers, hoodies, pants, anything else, big schools, small schools in your life, a couple other big schools coming soon after Kansas. Grab them all at homefieldapparel.com. Bryan, in non-athletic apparel related news, I'm trying to think here of the other big stories that we didn't end up turning into something, which is always kind of a challenging thought exercise because you and I produce a ton of stuff. 5 Extra Points newsletters a week. Between the two of us, we do between 5 and 10 Collegiate Sports Connect individual interviews that you can find there. That's a free account. We're going to share a couple more of those in the show notes I did earlier this week. What am I forgetting? What else has popped up that's been big this week that we haven't had a chance to dedicate some energies to?
Well, I think there's still some of the tail end of non-college football playoff expansion happening. That was another kind of big story that I noticed a lot of people were talking about, clicking on links and whatnot, because especially in the Pac-12, I think there was a few folks caught by surprise, given the insistence by George Kliavkoff, the commissioner there. They were in favor of expansion, and then you hear Mark Keenum certainly kind of let the cat out of the bag that the vote was 8-3 as the alliance said absolutely not, and maybe that was part of the Pac-12 kind of saying, hey, we're with our alliance bros, but George Kliavkoff to John Wilner of the San Jose Mercury News explaining the vote a little bit more. Obviously, there was a lot to do with the Rose Bowl. We know that was a sticking block in terms of the Pac-12 and the Big Ten as well. We knew that was happening, but he also made sure that there were some question marks about the revenue distribution plan, especially because this was, even though expansion was going to happen early, it was really just for 2 years. That was kind of the change in the contract. So what happens in quote unquote year 13, which we will now have experience with, given that's when the expanded playoff will ultimately take place? What is that going to look like? And I think that's been a concern for a lot of folks. It's not been the stumbling block for folks in the Sun Belt or the Big 12 or the AC. They're comfortable with moving ahead first and then figuring that out. But it seems like that was a bit of a roadblock for the Pac-12 and the new Pac-12 commissioner, and essentially saying, I'm not going to sign anything when I don't know what the money cut is going to be like down the road.
That is a great point. And tracking this story, honestly, has also made me, I don't say this very often, but this is a time when it makes me think, wow, my political experience, my political science degree is actually coming in handy a little bit, because it reminds me a little bit of the concept of taking a tough vote in Congress or for other legislative sessions. And when you realize here that something's not going to pass because it has to be unanimous, that might give you either the flexibility, or because of other political coalitions, require you to take certain action, even if you know that your own individual decision does not change what happens one way or another. So that can be frustrating for college football playoff criminologists, I think, that are trying to chart the vote tally here and decide who's the bad guy and who's not. I don't know if those numbers are necessarily perfect depictions of how everybody feels about everything. And that can make trying to listen to everyone's response a little bit tough. I definitely think it is fair to say Rose Bowl's a big deal. And I know that if you are the fan of a program that is not involved with the Rose Bowl very often, or if you are not a sports writer of a certain age, you might wonder what the big deal is. And for certain stakeholders within the Big 12, the Big 10, and the Pac-12, it is not just another bowl game. That is not just a thing to haggle over in exchange for something else. That's a big sticking point. That's part of why it took so long to have the college football playoff to begin with, was really about this specific a specific business entity. I think the other big takeaway that I really had from this, listening to a lot of these other interviews, is goes back to something you and I have talked about so much over the last year, which is the crisis of trust within college athletics and how that makes things more difficult to reach complicated consensus and navigate through these difficult issues if you don't trust, not even like liking the guy at the other side of the table, but trusting them to not leak damaging information or leak things to make you look bad, or to be an honest broker in negotiating everything here. And it definitely seemed like there were some real hurt feelings about who got thrown under the bus and how when this whole thing transpired, which would make it even harder to reach the next stage in this process, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the folks out in the ACC kind of understand that they're playing the bit of a bad guy, just in terms of the public stance that they've taken, and obviously they're comfortable with that because they
Yeah,
think they're doing it for the
Jin
right
certainly
reasons,
is.
right?
Yeah.
So I think there is that standpoint, but when you look at the Big Ten and the Pac-12 in particular, like I think these leagues would still like playoff expansion to ultimately happen. It's just some of those finer details they really cannot overcome, and so that is a bit of a hurdle for them. And honestly, you talk about just having so many new commissioners. They don't really know Greg Sankey all that often, all that much. Like they've only had a couple meetings with him here and there. And Greg's been around for college athletics. I mean, he's been a commissioner before. He's been around the game and around the NCAA, doing a lot of things around college athletics and college football in particular, long before he was even elevated to the SEC commissioner. Bob Bowlesby has been around for forever, going back to his days as Iowa AD.
Before you and I were born, some of these guys have been doing this.
Yeah, and as much as somebody like Jim Phillips has done a lot of stuff with the NCAA and has done a lot of stuff, from his previous chair as Northwestern AD, it's just different as the commissioner representing multiple schools, and really multiple different viewpoints inside your own conference, and trying to kind of get everybody going to the same page can be difficult. These guys are obviously new. There's been presidential and AD turnover in all their conferences as well, that you got to keep in mind as well. So, some fresh perspectives, have certainly changed and altered things. I personally don't think that it's to the point where it should have happened like this. I think if you go back to, there's not really that much that has changed. When you go back from the initial proposal, yes, Texas and Oklahoma are leaving. Yes, there's some conference realignment out there, but in terms of the nuts and bolts things, like if you were gung-ho about it and you were bringing up these issues about the Rose Bowl or about student athlete health and all that, back in late summer, why are you doing it now? And I think that's in the fans' minds in particular, a lot of the crux of the matter in terms of this angst. Versus if you're the conference commissioners, you just don't know some of these people. You just don't know how their viewpoints are changing, why they're changing, and ultimately what is their biggest roadblock for this happening. But it does kind of put some pressure on, because this talk is not over. We're going to get 3 or 4 more years of it, because ultimately there has to be a contract in place for the next edition of the college football playoff. After year 12, after that contract is over, theoretically, we could go back to the bowls, just inviting whoever they want, and the AP crowning their national champion.
Don't say that. Don't visualize. Don't manifest that. Don't put that evil out on us.
You say evil, but there are definitely some people out there that have they hold it close to their heart that they want to return to this type of system. I'm not one of them, but
dude, yes, I know they exist. On the internet, we can find people that think we should be a monarchy, that want to drag everything back to 1905 and only play college football with students that would have otherwise gotten regular admittance to the school, and do everything like we did in 1906. People that think that the forward pass is communism. Like, you can find anything on the internet. Those people, their opinions are wrong. And just like I don't want to debate a monarchist on the internet, or somebody that wants to go back to the Paleolithic era. No, I think it would suck to go back to college football 1972 in many different ways. This is one of the 2 gigantic existential questions that college sports has to solve in the next 18 months, right? What is Division I going to look like? What are the rules of the game? How do we decide who gets in? How is this going to be organized? What is championship access? And then how do we distribute the veritable shit ton of money that comes from the college football playoff to everybody else? Those 2 things are connected. And figuring all that out when everybody doesn't like each other is going to be a challenge. There's one other small thing I did want to highlight I think, speaking of organizational challenges and figuring out how to distribute money, that caught my eye. Many of you listening are aware of this, but if you're not, one of the things that Extra Points tries to do beyond write a daily newsletter and beyond produce 2 podcasts, always other things, is we try to create a database that's for free, full of open records in college athletics. And by that, we mean if you want to look at the apparel contract for most Division I schools, we have them. If you want to see what a game contract looks like in the future, how much a particular head football coach makes, we've been spending a lot of time over the last couple of weeks trying to build this for women's college basketball head coaches, so we can see what buyouts typically look like and how much the coaches get paid, and how those structure differs from men's head coaches. All of that's on there. And because of that, we get an opportunity to inspect a lot of deals and look how some coaches have different perks. They have different guarantees. They have different obligations. And these things are important, not just right before a coach gets fired, so we can all look at the PDF and see what the buyout is, but also to see what kind of insights we can tease about how football, what those contracts tell us about an athletic department. The deal that was recently shared with the Grambling's head coach, Hugh Jackson, former NFL head coach, prior to everything with Art Briles. The university released that contract. People have had a chance to expect it. One of the unique things about this is one of his bonus clauses. It's not super uncommon. You and I have talked about this before. For a coach, particularly at a mid-major, to get a bonus for a lot of extra ticket sales, right? If a school doesn't bring in a whole lot of people and suddenly a bunch of people come, for a coach to get 15, 20, 25% of ticket sales or ticket revenue above X, Y, or Z, that's not crazy. Deion Sanders has a deal like that for Jackson State. I think he's also got a kicker if the school changes conferences. I'm aware of a couple of other like mid and low major basketball coaches who have something similar. Bryan, what's in Hugh Jackson's contract? Because it's not just about tickets.
I believe it's new revenue streams, which was kind of the new buzzword, which I think is a bit different. Like you said, I mean, it's definitely more of a basketball thing to kind of have some of these clauses, in their contracts. I think it's becoming more and more a part of football contracts. Obviously, you talk about the APR and graduation and making a bowl game. Those are all pretty standard for a lot of football contracts. But I think what is new with Hugh Jackson is just that new revenue aspect. And ultimately, what is that going to mean? What is it kind of specified in the deal is going to be interesting because I think it was a big deal, and certainly initially to have a school like Grambling lure a former NFL head coach, to go coach their school. There was obviously a lot of euphoria coming around that hire and getting things back in track. Certainly that got derailed with everything going on with Art Briles and what was happening with Hugh Jackson's foundation and all that. So, I think it's definitely interesting to see some of these newer clauses because I think a lot of schools kind of see this as a way to kind of insulate themselves, not only from financial risk, but to give that carrot out there for these coaches to not only do well, but do well where everybody kind of shares in the success. And we'll see ultimately what becomes of these clauses and this contract itself if it starts to become more of a new thing for a lot of other coaches out there. But honestly, it's not surprising that this ends up happening now because I think agents are getting creative in terms of how they can insert some certain things in there, and schools are trying to get creative as well to where, like I said, they can make sure everybody shares in that success.
I think fans might forget this, but being a head football coach across most of the NCAA really is a sales job, and it's not just about sales job insofar as recruiting athletes to win football games, but you need to have a certain number of athletes on that roster because you need to bring in that tuition money to go to the school. Like you need to get revenue, and especially at the Division II and Division III level, like that's a big deal. Even at the Division I level, where it's a little bit less about tuition revenue, it isn't just about winning football games. You are the guy that goes to the rubber chicken dinners. You are the one that's trying to help with the athletic department fundraising. And for a resource challenged institution, it might make sense for somebody who's very famous and has a lot of connections outside the university community to say, can you help us try to secure some more corporate money or a licensing deal or something that we wouldn't normally have access to? And there's some evidence that worked. Everybody at Grambling is going to have an NIL deal. And there's P5 schools that can't say that. Even just for their football players, there's P5 schools that can't say that. Now, if I was somebody who viewed a major part of my job description to increase goodwill and corporate engagement and brand awareness and excitement around my program, I would simply not hire the greatest pariah in college football over the last decade and then screw up the messaging around it, only to have the whole thing be undone a couple of days later. But I'm built different. I'm not Hugh Jackson, so I don't know how permanent some of that reputational damage will be. I could tell you it was pretty significant in the short term. And I had ADs and people at other departments like kept texting me, reaching out, saying like, what the hell are they doing? It's not like this was unknown. We saw what happened with Southern Miss. We saw what happened with the CFL. Like, you should have seen this coming, to say nothing of the stuff with the foundation, which would be kind of funny if it wasn't also potentially tax fraud. But it is kind of a clever contract idea. And if I was maybe I don't know, like a Big South school or an NEC school that needed to scare up some extra money to make things more consistent moving on, maybe that's something I'd think about to maybe properly incentivize the coach to make a couple of those extra phone calls.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that a lot of the bulk of really the coach's revenue comes from not from that base salary, right? That although those schools are paying that base salary, a lot of it comes from media appearances, Nike fees,
Yep.
Related to just doing things, radio shows, that sort of thing. I mean, that is the bulk of the money at especially at the FBS level when you're talking about the coaches' contracts. It's coming from that. It's not coming from their really $500,000 or less, kind of base salary. That definitely does change from school to school and from state to state, given some contractual issues that a lot of these universities face. But at the end of the day, the money gets paid out, and the way they do it, can get creative. And I think you're starting to see more and more creativity with a lot of these contracts to make sure that the school's protected and also that they can kind of grow the pie overall and everybody can share in it.
That's what everyone's trying to do. It's been a big week. It's been a big week with conference realignment. It's been a big week with money in college athletics. It's been a big week administratively. It's been a big week for a bunch of other things. As always, I would encourage you to make sure that you are subscribed to Extra Points, where you'll be getting a newsletter every single day. We've written about not just potential significant conference realignment across FCS, 1AAA, and even the FBS. We wrote earlier this week about how conferences and universities can and should respond to war or humanitarian disasters or much larger existential crises, and how universities are trying to grapple with that right now. We had a long podcast discussion with an athletic director at a school that is reclassifying. I also talked to one of their coaches on the women's soccer side to talk about what that means, nuts and bolts. A lot more paperwork than I had expected. Bryan had a bunch of really interesting conversations too. Like what else have you been producing on CSC that maybe not everybody's had a chance to hear yet?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're speaking of football. The very first spring game of the season is occurring on Thursday night as part of Coastal Carolina. They kind of kicked things off, and so I had a chance to talk with Coastal's AD. Obviously, a lot of topics about media rights and all that with some additional conversations there and connect. So a lot keeping that content pipeline fed and a lot of interesting stuff. If you do have that interest in college athletics, I think we're doing a lot of stuff on a wide variety of subjects. You mentioned some of your stuff. I mean, where else are you going to get a field hockey explainer other than Collegiate Sports Connect? So
that's right. I got range.
That's a lot of good stuff on there.
We have range, yeah.
The account is free. Like, we do appreciate everybody listening to the podcast and tuning in on YouTube and, listening on and rating and reviewing and all that. But, Collegiate Sports Connect, another way to kind of get more in depth in this industry. All those accounts are free, especially if you're like a college student out there. Maybe you're in the industry already. And if whether you're looking for a new job or not, get your profile out there to be able to connect with a lot of your colleagues out there, see some things that, some new ideas, see how other athletic departments are doing things. I think we kind of have that wide variety of things covered. And as usual, you can find almost all of it in that D1 ticker and on Extra Points as well.
If you also, I know you care about college athletics because you listened to 40 minutes of this conversation. You've been following along for a while. So you should definitely take advantage of our full content library. Thank you to everybody that has said positive things about the show, that has reviewed it, that has shared it. Last month, we annihilated our record for downloads in a month, not just in terms of pure downloads, but also downloads per episode. That's been very exciting, and we owe that to you. We've smashed a lot of growth also on the newsletter side. So continue. If you enjoy what we're doing, you want to help support what we're doing, you can hit us up for sales at extrapointsnb.com. You can share the podcast wherever folks listen to podcasts. We've got some other fun guests lined up for next week. Everyone, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all on the internet.